Millionaire Ethan Bradford stood frozen behind the second-story window of his Aspen, Colorado estate, heart pounding at the sight unfolding in his garden. A black construction worker, his hands rough, his jacket stained with cement, was gently feeding a spoonful of soup to a little girl seated quietly on a stone bench. "Just one more bite, Elara," he said with a softness that cut straight through the morning chill. The girl giggled, and Ethan felt the sound hit him like a tidal wave. It was the first time he had heard his blind daughter laugh like that since the accident nearly 2 years ago. An accident he couldn't bear to talk about, much less forgive himself for. That simple, tender moment shattered something inside him, because no matter how much wealth he had amassed, no matter how many doctors he had paid, he hadn't been able to reach her like this stranger just had. Ethan Bradford, a 47-year-old biotech millionaire, was once hailed as one of the brightest minds in medical innovation. But behind the gates of his luxurious Aspen estate, he lived more like a ghost than a visionary. After losing his wife to a sudden illness and causing the car accident that left his 10-year-old daughter blind, Ethan shut himself off from the world. He buried himself in work and allowed a rotation of nannies and private nurses to raise Elara, the daughter he loved more than anything but couldn't face without drowning in guilt. Elara, once a vibrant and curious child with a love for music and an ear for her mother's piano, had grown increasingly withdrawn. She no longer played, no longer laughed, and refused to attend her music lessons, convinced the keys no longer mattered if she couldn't see them. Her world, much like her father's, had shrunk into silence and shadow. Hoping to revive even a hint of life in their empty home, Ethan recently hired a landscaping crew to restore the overgrown garden, a place once filled with family picnics and weekend laughter. It was meant to be just another project, something to keep the estate from feeling like a mausoleum. But he never expected one of the workers to change everything. MALIK, 43, was not the kind of man most would notice at first glance. A black construction worker with a quiet demeanor and calloused hands, MALIK blended into the background like a shadow. But what no one on Ethan's staff knew was that MALIK had once been a rising civil engineer, top of his class, respected in his field, until tragedy pulled his life off course. After losing his daughter Zoe to a misdiagnosed illness and watching the system fail her, MALIK gave up everything: his career, his home, and his identity. He found solace in physical labor, in building and rebuilding what others had left broken. The garden project was just another job, until he met Elara. Something in the way she tilted her head to listen to the flowers, or the way she hesitated before taking a step, reminded him painfully of Zoe. And slowly, without intention or expectation, MALIK began to fill in the silence that surrounded the girl. He described colors with metaphors Elara could feel. "This red is like the sun warming your skin," or "this purple smells like your mum's old scarf." He taught her how to tell herbs apart by texture, helped her find her way around the garden without fear. What started as kindness became connection. MALIK didn't coddle Elara. He respected her ability to adapt and treated her like someone capable, not broken. Meanwhile, Ethan noticed. At first, it unsettled him. This man who could reach his daughter in ways he hadn't managed to do in 2 years. But beneath that discomfort was something deeper. A flicker of shame, then curiosity. Who was MALIK really? And why did Elara light up around him? The answer wasn't simple. It was buried beneath years of MALIK's personal pain and a shared tragedy that neither man had yet uncovered. The setting, Ethan's once-forgotten garden, became the unlikely stage where past and present would collide, and where a grieving father might finally be forced to see his daughter, not through the lens of guilt, but with the eyes of hope. As the connection between MALIK and Elara grew, so did the questions Ethan could no longer ignore. Why did this stranger care so deeply? And what, if anything, did he want in return? At first, Ethan Bradford was simply intrigued, then quietly unsettled by the transformation he witnessed in his daughter. Elara, who had barely spoken a full sentence to anyone in months, now laughed freely in the garden, asking questions, sharing stories, and even humming tunes while MALIK worked nearby. No therapist, no teacher, no world-renowned pediatric specialist had managed to coax that kind of response from her. But this quiet construction worker with concrete on his boots had found a way into her world, like it was the easiest thing in the world. Ethan couldn't look away. The curiosity soon turned to suspicion. He instructed his assistant to quietly run a background check on Malik Anderson, just to be safe. The results, however, left Ethan reeling. Malik wasn't just a laborer with a kind heart. He was a former civil engineer with honors, a man who had once been on the path to academic and professional greatness. But what stood out most wasn't his credentials. It was the tragedy that followed. His daughter, Zoe Anderson, had died 5 years earlier under mysterious circumstances following a controversial treatment at a private hospital. A hospital that had received major funding from Ethan's own biotech company. The deeper Ethan dug, the clearer the connection became. Zoe had been part of a clinical trial sponsored in part by Bradford Therapeutics, one of Ethan's most lucrative ventures. A series of legal settlements had buried the details, but Malik's name appeared in archived complaint letters, patient advocacy blogs, and one unpublished op-ed accusing the hospital of negligence and unethical testing on children with rare disorders. Ethan's heart sank. The guilt he'd carried for Elara's blindness now twisted with a new fear. Was Malik's kindness toward Elara genuine, or was it calculated? Suddenly, every moment Malik spent in the garden felt different, less like a blessing and more like a setup. Ethan began scrutinizing Malik's every movement on the security cameras. Was he manipulating Elara, earning her trust to get closer to him, or worse, using her as leverage? The thought made Ethan's skin crawl, yet despite his growing paranoia, there was no evidence of wrongdoing. Malik remained consistent, patient, respectful, even distant when Ethan was present. But that only heightened Ethan's internal war. He wanted to believe this man was simply good, driven by compassion. And yet, the timeline, the proximity, the coincidence, it was all too neat. The part Ethan couldn't shake was the question gnawing at his conscience. If he had truly funded a trial that harmed Malik's daughter, then maybe Malik didn't have to do anything sinister to exact revenge. Maybe all he had to do was let Ethan unravel himself under the weight of his own shame. What tormented Ethan most wasn't the fear of retribution, it was the dawning awareness that Malik had already done more for Elara in a matter of days than he himself had in years. He had the wealth, the power, the connections. But he hadn't had the courage to sit with her, talk to her, or show her that she was still whole. Now, a man who had lost everything had done just that, and without asking for anything in return. Still, doubt lingered like smoke. What did Malik truly want? And why now? The collision course between these two fathers was inevitable, but Ethan still had no idea how deep the story went, or what secrets were waiting to surface. The confrontation Ethan had been dreading finally came one crisp evening after Elara had gone to bed. Malik stood in Ethan's study, the fire casting shadows across his worn jacket, and said the words Ethan both expected and feared. "Yes, I took this job because I recognized your daughter's name and the doctor who treated her." There was no venom in his voice, just an aching weariness. Malik explained that years ago, his daughter Zoe had been under the care of Dr. Gavin Adler, the same neurologist who had diagnosed Elara's condition as permanent and untreatable. At first, Malik had been hopeful, but the treatment plan spiraled. The diagnoses shifted without explanation, and then one day, Zoe was simply gone, declared a casualty of an aggressive genetic anomaly no one had warned him about. Only later did Malik discover that Zoe had never even received a second opinion. Her case had been folded into a quiet experimental protocol, one later funded by Bradford Therapeutics. Malik had spent years chasing answers through red tape, legal threats, and confidentiality agreements, only to realize that no one cared about one grieving black father with a folder full of questions. So when he saw Elara's name, and when he recognized Dr. Adler in her case file, something inside him shifted. Not with anger, but with a sense of obligation. "She reminded me of Zoe," he said, his voice cracking, the way she tilted her head when she listened, the way she held back, like she didn't think she was allowed to take up space. He didn't come for revenge. He came because no child should be abandoned the way his daughter had been. Then came the second blow, one Ethan wasn't prepared for. Malik had quietly sought out Dr. Alina Kessler, a renowned pediatric neuro-ophthalmologist, and showed her Elara's medical records. After reviewing the scans and test results, she gave a stunning second opinion. Elara's condition wasn't necessarily permanent. In fact, with the right therapy and corrective surgery, there was a strong chance her vision could be partially, if not fully, restored. The diagnosis by Adler, the celebrated doctor Ethan had trusted and had helped fund, was not only flawed, it was professionally negligent. Ethan sank into his chair, the realization hitting him like a tidal wave. For the past 2 years, he had been mourning a version of his daughter's future that might not have been real. He had trusted the best names, written the biggest checks, and surrounded himself with experts, never once questioning whether he was protecting Elara or just protecting himself from hope. His entire world, built on science, control, and precision, suddenly felt like a house of cards. Worse yet, he had contributed to a system that may have failed countless other children just like Zoe. For a moment, he couldn't speak. The silence between them was thick, filled with grief, guilt, and something else. Something unfamiliar. Humility. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" Ethan finally asked. Malik hesitated, then answered, "Because I didn't know if you'd listen, or if you'd care. But then I saw how you watched her in the garden. I think you're ready now." The words stung with truth. Malik hadn't just seen Elara, he had seen Ethan too, for who he really was beneath the tailored suits and guarded silence. A man broken by regret, desperate for redemption, but paralyzed by fear. And now, standing in the middle of that quiet study, Ethan realized he had a choice: stay buried in guilt, or fight like hell to reclaim what might still be possible. Determined not to waste another day trapped in guilt, Ethan extended a hand, not out of charity, but out of purpose. Malik took it, not for himself, but for the children like Zoe who never got a second chance. From that moment, the two men, one a tech magnate with global reach, the other a construction worker with scars deeper than skin, formed a quiet alliance. Their mission began with Elara. With Malik's help, Ethan arranged a discreet consultation with Dr. Alina Kessler, the neuro-ophthalmologist who had reviewed Elara's records. The visit was sobering. After a thorough evaluation, Dr. Kessler confirmed that Elara's blindness wasn't irreversible. Her optic nerves showed signs of trauma, yes, but not complete failure. With the right neurosensory therapy, specialized visual rehabilitation, and a cutting-edge surgical procedure, Elara had a real shot at regaining partial, if not full, vision. The moment Ethan heard those words, he broke down. For the first time in 2 years, he let himself cry. Not from fear or guilt, but from hope. Malik didn't say much. He simply placed a steady hand on Ethan's shoulder and nodded, the way one father reassures another when words fall short. That night, over coffee in the kitchen instead of whiskey in the study, they mapped out their next steps. Not just for Elara's treatment, but for something much larger. Ethan, with his vast corporate connections and legal teams, began digging deeper into the operations of Bradford Therapeutics and its affiliated research hospitals. Malik provided what Ethan couldn't: names, faces, patterns, and the stories of other parents he had quietly connected with over the years. Families who had also lost children under the shadow of questionable trials and experimental misdiagnoses. Together, they uncovered a disturbing pattern of negligence, suppression, and institutional protection of doctors like Gavin Adler. Malik, who had once stood alone in his pursuit of justice, now had a platform. Ethan, once blind to the consequences of his business decisions, was finally using his influence to hold the system accountable. It was a strange dance, one built on pain, purpose, and slowly earned trust. But it worked. As Elara began her treatments under Dr. Kessler's watchful care, Ethan spent more time by her side, reading to her, walking with her in the garden. Malik had helped bring back to life, learning to listen instead of lead. Malik in turn found himself slowly healing, not because he had forgotten Zoe, but because he saw pieces of her in Elara's growing confidence and laughter. What had started as a fragile truce grew into genuine respect. Malik taught Ethan how to be present without needing to fix everything. Ethan taught Malik how to use power to create systemic change without losing sight of personal integrity. They were still worlds apart in background, but their shared experience as fathers, grieving, fighting, and hoping, bridged every divide. When a class action lawsuit was filed on behalf of families affected by unethical medical practices linked to Bradford Therapeutics, Ethan publicly backed the plaintiffs, turning his own company inside out to expose what had been buried. The media spun the story as scandal. Ethan saw it as salvation. He didn't care about the stock dip or the shareholder outrage. He cared about his daughter finally smiling with her eyes again, and about giving Malik the justice he'd been denied for years. In a world that often separated men like them, they had chosen to stand side by side, not because they had to, but because they knew what was at stake if they didn't. And as Elara slowly began to see light where there had only been darkness, both men realized something even more powerful. Redemption isn't earned in isolation. It's built together, one step, one truth, and one brave decision at a time. 3 months later, Elara Bradford stood in front of a piano for the first time since the accident. Her fingers hesitating over the keys, her head tilted slightly, as if listening for a signal only she could hear. A faint smile tugged at her lips, and then, softly, uncertainly, she began to play. Her vision wasn't fully restored, but it didn't need to be. She could now see shapes, light, and the outlines of her father's face when he leaned close. More importantly, she felt seen, finally, by the man she had once believed had disappeared into silence. Ethan Bradford had returned, not as the man he was before the crash, but as someone entirely new. The Ethan who now walked beside her in the garden Malik had restored wasn't a distant titan of industry, but a father who knelt beside her, listened to her stories, and waited patiently when she lost her place in a song. In honor of what he had learned, and what he had almost lost, Ethan poured his resources into the creation of a non-profit vision rehabilitation center. He named it the Zaya Foundation, after Malik's late daughter. The center, built in record time on the edge of Denver, focused on treating children who had been misdiagnosed, underserved, or ignored by the same broken system that had failed both their families. On opening day, children with walking canes and visual aids wandered wide-eyed through sensory gardens, therapy rooms, and music studios. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Malik and Ethan stood side by side, not as a millionaire and a laborer, but as two fathers forever changed by loss, healing, and the rare courage it takes to trust again. What began as suspicion and silence had evolved into something far more powerful. A shared purpose built on grief, redemption, and grace. Ethan spoke briefly at the ceremony, his voice cracking as he looked at Elara seated between Malik and Dr. Kessler. It took me nearly losing everything to realize what matters most can't be bought, built, or buried under guilt. It has to be chosen, every day, in every small act. Malik didn't speak that day. He didn't need to. His presence beside Ethan was enough. Their journey, marked by unimaginable pain, had become a story of resilience, of bridging worlds that rarely meet. And in that moment, surrounded by children laughing and learning to see again, both men understood that justice had taken root, not in a courtroom, but in the hearts of those willing to transform their past into hope for others. Sometimes, life has to bring you to your knees before you can learn to truly stand. Ethan had built empires, influenced policy, and held patents that changed the medical field. But none of that taught him how to be a father. It wasn't until he met Malik, a man who had nothing left but his integrity, that he began to understand the difference between power and purpose. The world often defines strength through wealth, titles, or control, but real strength lies in the humility to admit you were wrong, the empathy to walk with someone whose story doesn't mirror yours, and the courage to change. Not out of obligation, but out of love. Justice doesn't always come with headlines or lawsuits. Sometimes it's as quiet as a little girl regaining her sight, and smiling at her father like it's the first time she's ever seen him. And true legacy isn't measured by the structures you leave behind, but by the people you choose to lift up along the way. The Zaya Foundation wasn't just a building, it was a monument to every child who deserved to be seen, and every parent who dared to believe again. Ethan and Malik's story reminds us that redemption isn't a finish line, it's a decision. And in a divided world, the bridges that matter most are the ones built not from stone or steel, but from shared pain, radical forgiveness, and the simple, unshakable truth that love sees what the eyes often miss. Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey of healing, redemption, and unexpected connection. Stories like Ethan and Malik's remind us that no matter how different our paths may seem, love, courage, and the will to do what's right can unite us in ways we never imagined. In a world often divided by status, background, and pain, it's the moments of vulnerability, the choice to face our past, the bravery to seek justice, and the grace to forgive that truly define us. At X Daily Stories, we believe in telling stories that do more than entertain. We tell stories that inspire, that challenge how we see the world, and that remind us of the strength of the human spirit. Whether it's a father finding his way back to his daughter, a worker becoming a hero through quiet compassion, or an unlikely friendship changing the course of lives, these are the narratives that matter. If this story moved you, made you reflect, or reminded you of the importance of connection and second chances, we invite you to become part of our community. Hit the subscribe button now and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Every week, we bring you emotional, thought-provoking stories that celebrate justice, love, and the quiet power of everyday heroes. This isn't just another story channel, this is X Daily Stories, where every story has a soul. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.